Hi AP, welcome to your video on for loops. We are going to be looking at for loops off the canvas, off the canvas today, nothing drawing, just working in the console. So please make sure you have opened the starter code, you have made a copy, and you have that open along with this video so we can code along together. So for loops are going to look a little bit similar to while loops in that there's a looping structure that stops once a certain condition is no longer true. Their big difference is that where in while loops we always had to make a variable to go with our while loops, the for loop kind of has that structure built in. So before we even start coding, for loops are always going to look like this. It is always going to be for. We are going to make a variable, so we're going to declare a variable. We use some semicolons to separate parts here. So we'll declare a variable, we will set a condition, just like in our while loops, and then we will increment the variable. So whereas in our while loop we had to either increment the variable or at some point say that that variable became true or became false in order to continue, this does everything at once. So the first thing that we are going to do together is we are going to make a for loop where it will just print a series of numbers out into our console space down here. And we're going to be doing this for most of the tasks today, so this is another challenge where I'm going to recommend once you solve something, don't delete it, but go ahead and highlight and comment that out so that you have a cleaner console. So I'm going to go ahead and start my for loop. I'm going to put my parentheses in and I'm going to fill in those three components of a for loop later. I'm also going to put in my curly braces because just like with a while loop and with conditionals that we have seen, these curly braces tell the program where my for loop is beginning and ending and what should be included within that loop. So those need to be there. Everything that happens for this number of times goes between those two curly braces. Now inside of these parentheses, we said my first step is declare a variable. So the variable that I am declaring is something that is specific to this for loop. It is what we call a local variable, and I said we're going to talk more about local and global in the next unit. A local variable only exists inside this loop. I can't use it in the draw or the setup or anywhere else in the program unless it's between the curly braces that decide this looping structure. So this variable should have a unique name. That unique name should be different for every loop that you guys make, even though they are technically separate instances. Please try and vary the names you give them. For this instance, I'm going to just call it num because I'm working with numbers, and I'm going to say that num is going to start at 0. So that's my initial variable that lives inside this loop. Now I want this loop to run as long as num is less than 10. I want this loop to run, so I'm saying while num is less than 10, that's built into my for loop. Then my final condition is I need to know how does num increase here. And I think I want it to increase by 1, so I'm going to show you a few options. I could write num equals num plus 1, which we have seen before. This is saying whatever value num was, add 1 to it and save it back to that variable name. I could also say num plus equals 1, which is totally acceptable and probably how I'm anticipating most of you will write this. And my final option, which only works if I am counting by ones, is I could just say num plus plus. Num plus plus will take whatever num is and add 1 to it. This is like the shortest way to write it. It is something you will see programmers doing all the time, but if it doesn't make sense to you, num plus equals 1 works perfectly. I can go ahead and hit play, and I'll notice that nothing happens, and that's because I haven't defined anything to happen in this loop. So inside of this loop, let's go ahead and put console log, and I'm going to just type a little message to myself. I'm going to write the number is, that's my string. Outside of those quotations, I'm going to put plus, and I'm going to put 1. Or I'm going to put num. I'm sorry, not 1. So what this is going to do is every time this runs, it's going to print out the value of num, and it's also going to tell me what the number is. So if I hit play now, I'm going to see in my console that the number is 0, the next time this loop runs it is 1, the next time it runs it is 2, all the way up to 9. And some of us might be wondering, why is it running up to 9 when we said that we want it to go to 10? And that's because in this instance, once we hit 9, the next time this runs, num is going to be 10. 10 is not less than 10, so this can't keep running. So if I wanted to get the number 10 in there, I would need to put less than or equal to 10. And now when I run it, I see it goes all the way up to 10. If I didn't want this 0, I would need to adjust this first number so that I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can also choose to increment by different values. I could add 10 every time instead of 1, and adding 10 every time, oops, it's just going to say 1. Let's put this at 100. Putting 10 every time, it will now count all the way up to 91. I'm going to go back to having num just less than or equal to 10, and I'm going to go back to having num plus equal 1, because there's more that I want to do and demonstrate with this. So this is like cool, and we're getting a lot of things to happen at once in just really 3 lines of code, which is fantastic, but we can do more interesting things than this. So I would like us to try and make a program that's going to assess if a number is even or odd, and it's going to print out like 1 is even, 1 is odd, 2 is even, all the way down our list of numbers. So to do that, rather than just having a console log inside my for loop, I'm going to put a conditional inside my for loop. And this is going to work the same as we've seen when we nest things before. That conditional needs to live between these curly braces, and while indentation won't ruin this program, it is generally a best practice to indent in just so you can tell that it's definitely inside the loop. So I'm going to start by writing my if, I'm going to put my curly braces, I'm going to do my little thing here, my parentheses, my curly braces, and then I'm going to go back to figuring out my condition. So yesterday you guys learned about modulos, and modulos determine divisibility. So if I wanted to know if a number is even or odd, I could use a modulo here. So on number 6, I could say that if the num, which again, that's the variable that's changing every time this loop runs, is divisible by 2, which means num mod 2 is going to be the same as 0. That's the same as saying is divisible by 2. Then I want to console log that this number is even. So I'm going to this time start with num, and I'm going to say num plus is even, so that it's going to print that out. Now this will report the numbers that are even, but I also want to say when numbers are odd, and so I have a few options here. One is that I could say else if num mod 2 is the same as 1, which would mean it's an odd number because it has that remainder of 1 left over. Then I could do my same console log and keep going. But I could also recall that, with the exception of 0, numbers are really just even or odd. So rather than writing a whole other else if statement, I could just say else, it has to be odd, and then I could say num plus is odd. And if I wanted to go back and make this more correct to work with 0, that's when I would add in my different else if and then make my else just relate to 0. But since I'm not using 0 here, let's just hit play and see what happens. So now I see 1 is odd, 2 is even, 3 is odd, 4 is even. So this is like a fantastic way to try and use this for loop for good to make something interesting happen, and that's what you guys are going to be doing in these challenges. Sometimes you'll just be printing out the number on its own in the console, sometimes you guys will be printing a statement when it's divisible by a certain value, sometimes you'll be using it to pick random values, but you will be making these for loops work for you. Again, if you have a for loop that's printing a lot of values, some of these are going to ask you to print upwards of like 100 numbers. Please make sure you comment that out once you are done, and as a reminder to quickly comment things in and out, you can highlight everything, and if you are on a Mac, you would hold Command and hit the question mark button. That'll turn it into a comment. If you hit it again, it'll remove the comment. You can also, if you are on a PC, I believe it is Control, or yeah, I think it's Control and then the question mark button. It might be Alt and the question mark button, but that will turn things in and out of comments for you. Later on this year, we are going to learn about different ways that you can write text and combine numbers. That makes it a little bit more intuitive, but for right now, this will work great for our purposes. Good luck, guys, and come to Lab Lounge hours if you have any questions.